Americans who have lived in Russia, what surprised you in this country? Which stereotypes turned out to be untrue?
Turns out America doesn't really bother them much. They either don't care about it or they speak about it positively.
Wait, are you telling me there are countries where people don't talk about the great America 24/7?
Studied in Russia for 6 months, many Russians living in big cities are very educated and work a lot. I'd even say more so than the average American. The older generation that grew up in the USSR is even more educated. That said, they still hold a lot of superstitions and somewhat outdated views on gender roles and certain aspects of biology. They don't have a lot of money, so they rarely travel outside their country. As a result, their view of the world is often limited to Russia and nearby regions. Many of them don't strongly support the current government and aren't very interested in politics because ordinary people feel completely powerless in that field. For the most part, they just focus on their everyday lives.
Support us by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Just a few clicks for you, but a huge motivation for us to grow. Got questions? Drop them below. We read everything and always reply. The best ones might even show up in our next video.
Not everyone there drinks vodka 24/7. Yeah, there are quite a few drunks, but there are just as many hardworking people as in America.
And when Russians drink, they don't say "na zdorovye," they say "za zdorovye," for your health.
Their winters aren't actually that harsh. It's the lack of smiles on their faces that really makes the country feel less warm.
A lot of people on this thread seem surprised that Russians are actually nice folks. Do people really still believe the stereotypes about evil Russians? I'm American myself, but I never bought into that.
Generally, wherever you go, regular people are decent because they're just like us. But the people in power, yeah, they're usually real assholes.
Why be surprised? For the last 60 years in almost every American movie, Russians have always been portrayed as gangsters. If you hear a Russian accent, you can bet the character is going to be a villain.
I traveled across all of Russia by train and spent a few days in Moscow. Once in Moldova, a Russian guy even helped me fix my motorcycle. Before I left my country, people told me Russians are like coconuts and Americans are like peaches. Russians have a hard shell that's tough to crack, but once you do, they open up, invite you over, and act very friendly. Americans, on the other hand, are like peaches, soft and friendly on the outside, but hard inside. You might hit it off right away, but when it comes to their personal life, they become very cautious. The Russian guy who helped me with my bike said an American will gladly smile and chat with you, but only if you're standing outside his fence. He won't actually invite you in.
Americans still think Russians spend 2 hours a day standing in line for potatoes and vodka, waist-deep in snow, wearing a nushaka. In reality, that's not true. They stand in line for 3 hours.
Americans don't realize that Russia also has racial issues. Russia's very diverse, just like the US. In the East, there are people who look like Koreans, and in Central Asia, there are typical natives from former Soviet republics. And they've got their own tensions, just like we do here.
I lived in Moscow in 2007 while I was in university. I can't tell you about all of Russia since it's a massive country with many peoples and different outlooks on life, but I can't tell you about Moscow. Overall, our ideas aren't too far from reality. Many people drink a lot and respect strong leaders, even if their power negatively affects the rights and freedoms of the population. But we're a bit wrong in thinking all Russians are depressive and unapproachable. It's true in the sense that Russians don't make eye contact with strangers on the street, don't smile, and won't just randomly come up and, say, pet your dog, which feels strange to me because I'm from Texas, where it's considered pretty rude not to smile at a passerby. So yes, this public side of gloomy and unwelcoming Russians is definitely a thing. Here's another thing. Even though many Russians like to drink, not everyone does, and I notice a clear age divide. People between 20 and 40 tend to drink less and focus more on their careers. As for the idea that Russians don't like Americans, I found it to be the opposite. They love our culture and what the American entertainment industry produces. You wouldn't believe how many times at university this one guy, his name's Dima, came up to me asking me to explain the lyrics of American rappers.
Spent 3 months in Moscow. Before leaving, I stopped by my pharmacist to stock up on medication. When he found out where I was going, he was shocked and said, "They'll kidnap you there. Those guys run around the streets with Kalashnikovs." I tried to convince him it wasn't like that at all and that I'd be fine, but he really doubted it. Ironically, less than a year after I came back, some guys tried to rob his pharmacy and ended up killing him. They never found the criminals.
I'm so afraid that it's about to turn out that not all Russian girls are beauties.
No, man, they really are gorgeous.
I go to Russia every summer. Today's Russia seems pretty Western to me. They have a lot of Western food, Western fast food, stores, and all the things we're used to seeing in the US. And they no longer try to hide anything from visitors. I've been to different parts of Russia, and it's nowhere near as well maintained as Moscow and St. Petersburg. Back in Soviet times, as a tourist, I never would have been able to see any of that.
Russians just have amazing food, and it's much less unhealthy than American food. As it happens, I have serious stomach problems and can eat very little from the American diet. When I first moved to Russia, I thought I'd have to stick to my strict diet, but it turned out I could eat almost all Russian dishes and feel absolutely great. I haven't felt as good as I did there in a long time. Sometimes I seriously consider moving back to Russia just for the food. Also, most Americans probably don't know that in Russia, after 11 p.m., alcohol sales are banned. You can easily get something at a bar or restaurant, but in a regular store, they won't sell you beer or wine.
The fact that Russia is always gloomy and depressing. In late spring, early summer, St. Petersburg looks absolutely stunning, and the white nights more than make up for the fact that in December, the sun rises there almost at 10 a.m.
I first came to Moscow from Northern California in 2013 and ended up deciding to stay here indefinitely. What can I say? If you don't count the crappy service, the lack of smiles on people's faces, and the absence of sun in winter, I like everything here. Russians love American culture. They watch a lot of Hollywood movies. They're starting to get into Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Black Friday. I find it funny explaining our traditions to Russians. Also, in Moscow, they have an absolutely massive McDonald's. If I'm not mistaken, it has 27 registers, and there are always lines there. As for vodka, young people either don't like it or have bad associations with it, so they drink other beverages. Girls like fruit cocktails and wine, while guys drink whiskey and scotch or don't drink at all.
Russians seem really kind and genuine to me. If you ask someone for help, they'll go out of their way to do it. One guy fixed my computer even though I barely knew him, and later when I mentioned I wanted to learn SolidWorks, he offered to tutor me over Skype. Another time, I met a guy at a conference who gave me a ride home the same day, even though I lived on the opposite side of the city. It was totally out of his way, but he still spent a couple of hours just to help me out. I also had a professor at my university who suggested we work together on a small project. In the US, most professors would think that's a waste of their time. Overall, I've noticed that in Russia, teachers tend to take more responsibility for their students' success than in the States.
I've been living here for about 4 years now. When it comes to politics, Russians don't idolize Putin, but a lot of them, especially men, do support him. I don't talk about politics much, so maybe there are reasons I just don't know about. The way American and Russian media portray things is, of course, totally different. Russian TV shows Putin as strong, but also as a kind and pleasant leader, which is the complete opposite of how Americans see him.
I spent 2 months in Russia, mostly in Moscow. I'm actually not American, I'm Australian. Overall, the food there turned out to be way tastier than I expected, cheap and good at Teremok. Public transport is way more convenient than in Sydney, and the metro is just awesome. People were much nicer than I thought, but I never want to ride in a car with Russians again. Yeah, I can confirm the stereotype, they're terrible drivers. Not too many street punks, but the ones you meet are annoying. Russian apartments aren't as tiny as I imagined. It's actually a pretty decent country and not falling apart like TV makes it seem. But one thing is definitely true, their police is super corrupt and doesn't really bother being polite. Also, when people found out I was from Australia, not the US, they treated me way better. I give Russia a solid 5 out of 7.
My girlfriend and I taught English in Ufa for 3 years. Turns out Russians aren't as big and sturdy as I thought. At 173 centimeters, I actually felt pretty tall there. They've got a lot of rules about alcohol sales. After 10 p.m., you can't buy any. Also, I'm in a surprising number of Russians who don't drink at all. And it's definitely not because I lived in a Muslim region. I know plenty of Muslims who do drink. Drinking and driving is completely off limits, so if someone visits your place and you offer them a beer, chances are they'll turn it down. Russia isn't as dangerous as people make it out to be. In my 18 months there, I didn't have a single problem. Never had any run-ins with the police, and I never had to bribe anyone. That's pretty much all I can remember off the top of my head. If you ever want to know what's true or not about Russia, just message me. I'll be happy to answer.
I've been to Russia and went on dates with Russian girls. I have to say, they're very beautiful and sweet, but talking to the locals was pretty tough. You feel like a lost foreigner. Too bad the Russian language is quite hard to learn. Tried borscht, it was delicious. St. Petersburg is an amazing city and I'd gladly visit again. Sochi is also a nice city, but the beaches there are honestly terrible.
Russians love European culture and enjoy interacting with Americans. If you're American and living in Russia, you're something new and interesting to them. People are eager to improve their English and are happy to talk with Americans in English because they rarely meet native speakers. While I was in Russia, I was thanked a million times for coming, and just as many times people asked why on earth I was even interested in Russia. What really surprised me, as an American, was their shared sense of belonging to Russian history and culture, which they understand at a very high level. I mean, I also read some classic works in school, but they don't really intersect with my everyday life. I also noticed that Russians don't seem particularly proud of their country's politics. Plus, they don't appear arrogant, and only in rare cases do they consider themselves successful people. And unlike American individualism, the center of a Russian person's life is their family and close circle.
Not everyone there drinks vodka 24/7. Yeah, there are quite a few drunks, but there are just as many hardworking people as in America.
And when Russians drink, they don't say na zdorovye, they say za zdorovye, for your health.
Support us by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Just a few clicks for you, but a huge motivation for us to grow. Got questions? Drop them below. We read everything and always reply. The best ones might even show up in our next video.